Okay, so there's this topic that I don't speak much about because anytime that I do, people misinterpret it, especially if they're looking for certain wording and certain proof to confirm their bias without actually watching my entire video or actually paying attention to what I am saying. So oftentimes my words get misinterpreted by people who are hearing something I'm not saying. So I remember a conversation I had with my cousin a few years ago about schizophrenia because her brother is schizophrenic. And I was at the time going to a shamanic practice coaching school. I was going for the coaching skills and the self-regulation skills. That was important to me. And for the first year, I was all for, doing the practices and stuff like that. But even when I was doing one-on-one coaching, I wasn't doing it the way that they do it, because essentially I could see the delusion in a lot of the things that they were saying and doing. And as somebody, and I didn't talk in those groups either. I didn't hang out with the majority of them because of their extremities in just gaslighting, because essentially a lot of these people had access to medical professionals that work within the same spiritual circles as they do, that the average human being would not have access to. And thus we still have to manage and work through the medical system the way that it exists today, so we can't get testing our blood work the same way other people unless we afford it, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of delusion around it. And as a migraine sufferer, I could see a lot of it. And I would share what I would see in my dreams and things like that. However, the frustrating part, and that's why I understood bypassing for what it was when we were studying core beliefs, because essentially they're not taking into consideration what trauma is like. And when I tried to describe what I understood they were trying to do, it's like it was a whole thing. I even sent an email to the instructor calling her the distraction, because essentially that's what she was. And so so for a trauma survivor, it's not as easy as going in there and just trying to find that limiting core belief or that act of shame or whatever it was that caused whatever in your adulthood. For someone with CPTSD, oftentimes our triggers can tell us a lot about the situations that we're living in. So it does become a gift, but it's also a very bad curse. And if you start looking for meaning in everything and signs and everything, you're going to drive yourself nuts, which is what they call synchronicities. And so there's a couple different gifts that correlate with severe migraines and complex migraines, like clear smelling, clear knowing, clear sentience, all the clairs essentially correlate perfectly with migraines, seizures, and stroke. And so the important thing is to know, and this is not medical advice or spiritual advice, the important thing is to always make sure that you're getting yourself medically treated and medically intervened if necessary, because oftentimes, yes, a person with a tumor could be predicting the future. A person with seizures could also be predicting the future. It's called deja vu. So a lot of times migraine sufferers do suffer from deja vu. I remember I would open the door before my cousin would knock, knowing that she was on the other side. Yes, this is a spiritual gift. A lot of times even schizophrenia was a spiritual gift. Why? Because in a tribal setting, that schizophrenic is completely surrounded by safe individuals. The voices are probably safe. And if they weren't, then the entire tribe would understand that something is up with the tribe. Somebody is fucking with this individual for these voices to no longer be safe. Essentially not giving in to the person's delusion, but also not setting aside the fact that that delusion actually can pick up on things that are happening within our reality. And as somebody who has lived through psychosis, because I did experience psychosis when I was on a bunch of medications a few years ago. We did discover that the medications were the problem. They removed the medications, the problem went away. However, as someone who did survive psychosis, I can honestly tell you that how your family treats you during that period of time is how severe your symptoms and your condition is going to get. So if your support system is a shitty support system, that psychosis might become permanent. That psychosis might become schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, OCD. I was starting to develop OCD. Even my sister's like, I don't know how to help you. Why don't you just compartmentalize? You've always compartmentalized. And I don't think they realize how much that breaks the body to compartmentalize like that when you're managing so many chronic conditions, medications. At the time I was in college, the stress of college, a couple weird things happened while I was in college. Then I became a caregiver to family members, and a lot of stress. A lot of stress can also, and lack of sleep, can lead to small bouts of psychosis. And a lot of these spiritualists do that, where they don't sleep their regular hours or enough hours or whatever the case may be. And a lot of their thinking, yes, psychosis can lead to forms of clarity. That's what existential crisis is. You go into the depths of some of the darkest shadows and weird quirks that you might have, and you start to either dismantle them or build upon them to build a future that you bring into your conscious mind. It's another form of subconscious thought. And that's what I've tried to explain to medical professionals, that as much as you want to disregard, yes, our reality is real. But for the person who experienced psychosis or trauma or disassociation, wherever they went in that moment of disassociation, because I would have severe disassociation, in that moment of disassociation, that was real too. Everything that happened to them in that was also real. So when they are back in reality, the way you want them to perceive reality, you need to understand that now they're having to integrate a reality that is real for you and a reality that is not real for you but is real for them. And you don't have to accept the delusion to accept the value of the wisdom gained through that delusion. So oftentimes living separate lives within those dissociative states, people in comas living full-on lives and then having to process the grief of losing those lives once they came back to. That is a delusion. And we just don't see it that way. Like, we don't say, hey, the coma patient who's in a coma 3 years, they're psychotic. We don't talk about them the way we do about people suffering through real mental health crises. So a lot of what we're learning in these spiritual spaces that are trying to bring tradition back into the world are forgetting the fact that we do not have established communities to be able to do that. So yes, even if there is people suffering from mental health conditions that may not be dangerous in the sense that they're a threat to themselves or others, they could still be suffering. And there's a huge judgment around mental health medication right now. I have suffered from mental health medication because I don't respond well to it. Some people do not. However, some people do. We don't get to judge what's best for someone else's vessel. And to believe that somehow they are less weaker or whatever because they choose one medicine or the other. Marijuana gets looked down on a lot, but marijuana on its own stands alone for my nausea. It stands alone for my pain. It stands alone for my sleep disruptions. It stands alone for my anxiety. However, overuse of that makes it so none of that is possible. So what do? I have combinations of CBD. I have my flower powers that are mixed herbs with CBD or just mixed herbs on their own. I have my CBD standalone. I have the CBD THC combinations and all of the other THC variants and CBD variants that are available. Why? Because using the right medicine for whatever the issue is can actually lead you to a better understanding of what is the trigger for your problem, which can lead to remission. Remission does not mean that you are not living absent of disease. It means that you have found a plateau and you're not getting any worse. Sometimes you get better, but not usually. You're just not getting any worse. So now you are declared in remission. Once you are in remission, though, the only way to stay in remission is to maintain the balance. Once the balance gets disrupted is when a migraine sufferer that had gotten most of their migraines under control is now suffering migraines again, because they no longer, like, living in my car has made it impossible for me to do my regular routine of caffeine, my sleep hours, my exercise routine that I had in my garden, because I had incorporated my physical and occupational therapy into my garden work. You know, all of that has a lot to do with whether or not I'm going to have fibromyalgia flare-ups, whether I'm going to have migraines, whether I'm going to have gut issues from having to go from just CBD, THC, flower power, herbal medicine back to using pharmaceuticals that start to slow down my gut, which start to have, on top of the migraines, now we have the gut issues. Now we have the nervous system issue, the bouts of fibromyalgia pain and joint inflammation, the colitis, bouts of colitis that I've had in the last couple weeks, the constipation and tearing of those areas. I will not get into, just to not make people feel more uncomfortable than they already probably are. Point is, even my skin issues and allergic reactions from the stress hormones and histamine response within my body, all of that could have been prevented. Even the breaking out, for the most part, could have been prevented, because on my face, no, I still get my menstrual, even though I don't have all the parts, I still get my menstrual hormonal changes. However, this time it's been my arms, my back, and everything. So it's very difficult to maintain chronic illness with the scopes that we have today, because there's a lot of delusion on both sides. There's a delusion on medical professionals believing that medicine alone is enough to be able to fortify a person who has to live with difficult conditions like chronic migraines or complex migraines. Yes, we find new normals, but when we're thrown into environments that don't support our new normals, like going from farms to cities, you have now disrupted that silent space that I had found for myself to reduce my sensory problems that cause those migraines, like my smell sensitivities, my light sensitivities. This is as dark as I can get the car. Yes, we find maintenance and we put it into our spiritual practice, but don't get delusional about it, because when you're guiding people away from doctors, which is something I never did, but I also didn't argue with anybody who spoke like that, is exactly why people thought I agreed with their delusions. I'm not willing to stay silent about it anymore. Whether you're a spiritualist or somebody who fully and only believes in medical, Western medicine, I'm going to have to cut you out of the conversation. I'm going to have to be like, you know what? I'm grateful for the advice that you're trying to give me, but keep it to yourself. Because essentially you don't understand. You don't understand what it took. Because I learned about conversion disorders back when I first got told about CPTSD, which was in 2018 or 19, and I really dove into conversion disorders around 2020 when the pandemic was going on, because I didn't want that to become me. And when I got my hysterectomy, I went through a lot of things that seemed, because I went to doctors in Mexico. At that point, I was, looking for help wherever I could, because the doctors here in the US were not listening to what I was saying and what I was learning from those doctors, because a lot of the doctors in Mexico also have spiritual practices. They incorporate that shit. A lot of Chinese medicine doctors do the same. American Western medicine is the only one that seems to separate the spiritual aspect or emotional aspect of the body and turning it into psychological pathology when it's not. A lot of what you guys consider psychological pathology are the first signs that things are happening within the body. And when you categorize it in that, you then form new biases that doctors ignore and solely attribute to anxiety, yes, some migraines can cause a lot of fear, and so on and so forth. So when I went to that, I did learn a lot of that. And then I was like, shit, in 2020, learning about conversion disorders, I couldn't get access. I was on lists for proper psychiatric care because Kaiser referred me out. And at that point, I was like, well, if I'm not going to get help from them, I'm going to learn as much as I fucking can. I found a spiritual school that actually taught coaching as well. I didn't like their business planning, which I loved that they let me opt out of, because essentially that's not what I was there for. However, there was a lot of delusion within those circles. So if you're somebody who has already struggled with things like mental health illnesses that were considered psychosis, disassociation, or even hearing voices, what is it called, schizophrenia or anything like that, you want to stay away from rigid spiritual circles. I'm not saying be afraid of spirituality, because a lot of the people that I've spoken within the last couple months, they're afraid of spirituality. They're afraid of religion, and religion has never been the problem. There's a lot of wonderful information in every single one of the Bibles for every single religion. There's a lot of useful information within those books. But what you need to understand is that they're just books written by human beings. So you just take what is for you. Instead of looking for the synchronicities or biases that confirms whatever it is that your belief is, look for the evidence that contradicts it. Debate it. That's how I've always done it. I don't share my process outside of myself. And my videos aren't a complete vision of what it is that I believe. I've explained that to people before, but they don't want to dig deeper into knowing what my beliefs are. But my process is that. Since I was in middle school, I was on the debate team for a little bit, and I was taught to debate. And then in high school, I did it for a little bit, not as a competitive thing, but in classes. Like, I really liked doing it in class on subjects that I was hyper fixated on, because I'd get, I love trivia too. I really love trivia. So essentially, I got really good at that stuff, because the only way to fortify faith and fortify beliefs is to contradict them, to consistently research and do the evidence against it and for it, so that you can debate yourself on whether this is a logical, spiritual, emotional belief that you should continue to have. Because a lot of traditions don't make sense anymore for the lives that we live today. A lot of traditions no longer make sense in the world that we live in today. A lot of the social systems that we live in within today do not make sense for future generations. And a lot of people advocating for some of the things that they're advocating for truly do not understand what it is that they're trying to dismantle. So I really invite you to always try to contradict yourself. Because it's not a contradiction if your beliefs change because you did more research and now you have more information, and now you get to decide whether or not the information that the conclusion that you established before is still the most adequate conclusion for your belief system. The only way to have a good foundation for a belief system is to dismantle that foundation as often as possible to see if it's still strong. And I'm not saying break it apart and tear your life apart. No, question your beliefs. Question where your beliefs came from. And not in a bypassing kind of way. Like, actually question them. Because flashbacks and triggers are real, because your body remembers something that you may not remember. And then you stay in places and environments that may not be useful or even congruent to future independence or future well-being or health. Because a lot of family systems operate behaving more like cults than they ever would as an actual united family. And no matter how much wealth you have in a family like that, it will always dismantle itself. Because even if they have financial riches, that sort of poverty reflects in the type of business that they do. and the type of businesses that they allow or invest in. So just keep that in mind, because yes, idealism keeps us impoverished according to the rich. However, they've solely convinced you of that so that you believe that you have no choices outside of whatever it is that they're selling you, the propaganda of whatever is popular in this moment that they are trying to sell you. Because we are consumers in this country. It's a consumerism place, a consumeristic country. And we consume even ideas and people in a very disgusting way. But that's a choice that we make, and we have to choose different. But anyways, I digress. Delusion and medical care. There has to be a balance, and we gotta stop with the battle going back and forth, because essentially the only way we get to communal and herd well-being, if you want to go with COVID terms, herd well-being. What was it? When to be able to have enough immune system. What is it called? Ugh, I'm losing words. I gotta take it up. But anyways, for herd well-being, like for all of us to be well, we have to be able to incorporate both, because we don't all have access to the types of spiritual circles. And as much as people want to say, hey, $35 isn't enough, it is for the person that doesn't believe in what you're doing, that wants to go and check it out, but doesn't believe yet that, relaxing a couple times a day or once a week, or finding a way to regulate the nervous system in alternative or somatic ways is going to be helpful. A lot of people that I know in the elder communities, especially ones that were not consistently exposed to that kind of medicine, oftentimes do not believe in it. I know my mom did it, and she saw it as a delusion. She saw a lot of what I do as medicine, including my dancing and stomping around, as delusion. What she doesn't seem to understand is that stomping around was actually helping me with a lot of my neuropathy. I was waking up through movement a lot of the problems with the body, and it requires to be done sometimes multiple times a day. And so I got a stim with dancing and stomping and whatever the case may be, brushing my skin, hitting myself with feathers and different materials to be able to get that movement and flow in the body, to be able to feel it again. I don't think people understand how weird it is to have half of your body not feel like your body. That's what I explained to one of the doctors. I was like, sometimes I feel like a chimera. It feels like a chimera. Like this left side is not mine. It's just not mine. Especially when it starts to go numb, or it goes numb for a few minutes and then comes back, or I can't smile for a couple minutes and then it comes back, or my whole arm just or twitches or gets stuck, or I get the claw that everybody's been making fun of me for about 20 years actually, and things like that. There's a huge misunderstanding of what migraines are, and a lot of the spiritual gifts that you are learning about also correlate hand in hand with psychiatric disorders. They also correlate hand in hand with disorders like tumors in different organs, not just in the brain. So please make sure when you are building your spiritual practice, you are also making sure that your medical health care and your mental health care are on point as well. It's a full circle. Holistic healing is not just all the alternatives outside of Western medicine. Holistic healing is treating your body as a whole, and treating all the parts of your body, not just the points that are convenient to you, because you would rather not have to see a doctor. Because a lot of holistic healers, that's their fear, that they feel just great and they're going to go to the doctor and they're going to tell them something is wrong. Just because they tell you something is off on your blood, it doesn't mean something is wrong. It means there's an imbalance that needs to be repaired. That is the first signs of disease. Being delusional about it and ignoring it is the problem. So please, at least get your fucking blood work done regularly. if not scans, and so on and so forth, if you start having synesthesia and seeing color and stuff like that. Because I've been made fun of and thought to be delusional a lot because of that when they hit the drums, because I see color. But I've known that my migraines do that since I was a teenager. I just don't talk about it because, you know, especially in these spiritual circles, you know, honey, we can totally, if you just do this and this, you can totally heal your limp. How am I going to heal my limp if my leg is shorter? I can't heal it just by thinking it away. I'm sorry. I can't grow my limb. Maybe someday, you know, maybe if I get delusional enough, I'll accomplish that. But I've dealt with this my entire life. And when the left side of my body gets weak, I start to limp more. Y'all just don't notice it because you're not paying attention until my limp gets bad. Same thing with my migraines. You guys can call it delusional all you want, but I want to believe it's magical. The pain is bad enough, I may as well get some form of magic out of it. Why the fuck not? However, that does not mean I believe in the delusions that you believe in, which is you can think away every single disease that you have, or you can, you know. I'm sorry. But yes, meditation and music and so on. And that's what I try to explain to people, and they think that I just don't know what I'm talking about. But sometimes it's the confidence in what you're saying and the magic that you're bringing, but you can turn, you know, real medicine into magic and allow a person to feel like a miracle. And that's okay too, because we are miracles, and it took a lot to get us here. And every single part of us, including that creative, imaginative side, will keep us alive. And that creative, imaginative side is the one that keeps us alive during the worst possible moments of our life, including severe trauma like car accidents, bombs, and so on and so forth. So keep that in mind when you're telling people not to feed their creative child-like self, because you may think it's delusion, but the stronger that side of you is, the more likely you'll be resilient enough to survive any sort of trauma within your life and eventually heal. I'm not saying it's quick, but eventually heal. So keep that in mind. I love you and have a good day.